how did you find this NATO summit for Ukraine? What was the outcome? Is there any outcome for Ukraine this summit?
I mean, the outcome is that Ukraine is doomed. Ukraine has no chance of survival. This summit didn't offer a lifeline to Ukraine. Ukraine's hope, going in only hope, was that they would be able to combine a successful counteroffensive that would put pressure on Russia to accept a negotiated peace with a NATO ready to pull the trigger at a moment's notice to allow Ukraine in. The goal was the moment a ceasefire could be implemented, meaning that the active phase of the war has stopped, that NATO would immediately invite Ukraine as a member, locking in Ukraine's survival and preventing Russia from continuing counteroffensive or continuing military operations, because now Ukraine would be protected by Article 5. And then the goal would be to put pressure on Russia to get them to withdraw from Ukrainian territory. This was the hope. The counteroffensive has failed miserably from a Ukrainian perspective. 26,000 dead, thousands of destroyed equipment. Just in the last couple of days, 330 plus tanks destroyed, many of them the modern Leopard tanks. Ukraine has yet to reach, let alone breach, the first line of defenses of the Russians. They're operating in the so-called crumple zone, the flexible defense zone. And Russia's just slaughtering them. And there's nothing that happened in this summit that changes that reality. So, Ukraine basically left the summit consigned to the reality that it's lost this war, and that eventually it's going to have to yield to pressure from the West to accept a negotiated peace with Russia at a time when Russia's in no mood to negotiate a peace. I think Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chair of the National Security Committee, has said that, thanks in a large part because of the military assistance provided to Ukraine by NATO, Ukraine has forfeited its right to exist. Now, that's a statement made by a man who isn't in control of Russia, but he is influential in Russia. And I think it represents the sentiment of many Russians that Ukraine as it currently exists cannot be allowed to continue to exist, at which time this war is ended.
Yes, God. How do you compare the way he was treated in this NATO summit in contrast to the way he was treated in his address to Congress in December 2022? What's your take on this?
Again, Zielinski is a manufactured leader. He exists in the narrative of a script written for him by his NATO masters. The script postures Zielinski as a Winston Churchill type figure, a heroic figure, a man leading a noble resistance against a brutal aggressor. But the reality is far different. He's a comedian turned politician who started a war with Russia, and I think we need to reinforce this point. Zielinski started this war, not Russia. Zielinski inherited from Petro Poroshenko the Minsk Accords that Zielinski said he would crawl on his knees to Putin during the election in 2019, crawl on his knees to look for a way to stop this war. Well, he had the chance. All he had to do was implement Minsk, and none of this would be happening today. But shortly after he was elected, he convened a council where he said that his policy is war, 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 because that's always been Ukraine's intention. The Minsk Accords, as we now know, thanks to admissions by Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, Francois Hollande, the French president, and Petro Poroshenko himself, the Ukrainian president, Minsk Accords was always a sham, that they never took it seriously. It was designed to buy time so that NATO could train the Ukrainian army, capable of launching offensive operations against the ethnic Russians of the Donbass and Crimea. That's always been the Ukrainian objective. So it was Zielinski who started this war. What Russia did is carry out a preemptive action of self-defense. No nation is obliged to sit back and wait for the other to attack. And no collective security grouping is obliged to do the same. And Russia had a collective security arrangement with the independent entities of Lugansk and Donetsk, who declared their independence from Ukraine, and that independence was recognized by Russia, which then entered a collective security agreement. Now, people will say, well, Scott, that's just a little too cute. That's just Russia playing games. It's the same legal structuring that the United States and NATO used to justify their intervention into Kosovo and justify the Kosovo Authority declaring independence from Serbia. So apparently what's good for the goose isn't good for the gander. The difference is the Kosovo situation was driven by a false narrative of genocide being carried out by the Serbians against the Kosovo Albanians. That never happened. That was a CIA manufactured story. So it was premised on a lie. The Russian intervention was premised on the reality that there were 60 to 90,000 NATO-trained Ukrainian forces massing in the Donbass region opposite the ethnic Russian militias that were preparing to launch an offensive operation sometime in early March. Rather than to wait for this to happen, Russia preempted it. So, Zielinski, started this war. He should have agreed to the peace deal that was put on the table by Russia, one that could have been signed on 1 April in Istanbul. The Ukrainians had apparently initialed off on this, but they were pressured by Boris Johnson, the British, and NATO to continue the conflict under the belief that the Russian military could be defeated. And again, Zielinski went along with this because, as you remember, in 2019, his entire posture vis-a-vis Russia was war, war, war. Not my words, his words. And what's happened is that neither Ukraine nor NATO have been up to the task of defeating Russia. Russia has mobilized. Russia has mobilized its defense industry, mobilized reservists. There's a high number of volunteers agreeing to go fight. Russia has consolidated its defensive, built up its own reserves, and Russia is going to win militarily. This is just a reality that can't be changed. And I think Zelensky's coming face to face with this reality. I think he's understanding that his gambit has failed, and that NATO is not willing to step up to the plate and come to his assistance. It's a sad state of affairs because he has literally sacrificed his nation for this false promise that was built on a bodyguard of lies promulgated by NATO and the United States. We're not here for NATO, for Ukraine. We're not here for the Ukrainian people. We don't care about the Ukrainian people. We don't care about the state of Ukraine. All we care about is a system that has Eastern European manpower, that's Ukraine, married up with NATO technology to bring pain to the Russians. That's always been the purpose of NATO. George Soros wrote about this back in 1993, and it's come to life before us today.
We see that Zelensky called this process of getting NATO membership as absurd, and we have Wallace calling we are not Amazon. Are these cracks getting more into the surface of this alliance, this support of Ukraine war?
Remember that the narrative that's being pushed in the Western media is the narrative being written by NATO, the United States, and Ukraine, and it's like a fairy tale. It's like we read about Cinderella, and we expect magic to happen. We expect glass slippers to magically fit on tiny little feet and transform somebody into a princess who dance with the prince, and off they go into the sunset, happily ever after. This is reality. It's just fantasy doesn't occur. And what we're seeing is people are starting to realize that it doesn't matter how many scripts you write. It doesn't matter how well the actors read from the scripts. Reality is reality, and you can't shake it. Zelensky, for whatever reason, thought that he was going to be able to find a rapid path to NATO membership because it's been dangled before him by NATO to keep him going. There's no reason for Ukraine to have sacrificed what they've sacrificed if there wasn't, a golden egg at the end of the trip. The golden egg is NATO membership, and now he's found out there is no golden egg. You scrape it, it's just an egg with gold paint on it. There's no gold there. There's nothing there. And the people that have been promising this, especially the British, because remember, Ben Wallace, even though he wasn't defense minister at the time, is part of a British government that at one time was headed by Boris Johnson. And it was Boris Johnson that told Zielinski, pull out of the peace treaty, continue this war because we're here with you. And now Zielinski's calling them out, saying, hey, I'm here. I've done everything you asked me to do. And now you're changing the rules. You're changing the game. You're changing everything. And it is absurd. I mean, it's absurd that Zielinski ever believed NATO to begin with, but it is absurd. And now Wallace's feelings are hurt. We're not Amazon. He said, well, you presented yourself as Amazon. You pretended that you were something. You pretended you had substance. I mean, everybody should have seen through the fact that the British are as shallow as any drying out lake or river. There's nothing to the British. Their army today couldn't fill a soccer stadium. They gave away 14 Challenger tanks. There's only 40 left. Britain's so small right now that people are starting to say that they have to restructure their presence in the NATO leadership because why should any British senior officer have a position when their military is so pathetic? So Johnson's, Wallace is on the defensive, as should all of NATO be. Joe Biden has made some ridiculous statements. Again, when are people going to realize that saying something doesn't make it so? Joe Biden, Russia has already lost this war. I would say that there's a whole bunch of people on the front lines that disagrees with you, Joe. Russia's winning this war. The notion a year when the United States produces 85,000. Ukraine is using ammunition at a rate of 7,000 rounds a day when they claim they should be using it at 28,000 rounds a day. The Russians are shooting 28 to 30,000 rounds, 40,000 rounds a day. But they are producing enough ammunition to replace this. The United States is out of ammunition. That's why we gave them cluster munitions. Munitions that don't work, by the way. The frontline reports coming from they've been used. They were used yesterday by the Ukrainian army against positions in the Zaporizhia area. And the battalion commander that got hit said, well, didn't kill anybody. I mean, it's sort of unpleasant. They go pop, 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 but we're dug into our trenches and we have overhead cover, and they were ineffective. I mean, and that's just the reality. Cluster munitions are not going to be a game-changing weapon for the Ukrainians. What they are going to do is give Russia a green light to use cluster munitions against the Ukrainians. And remember, the Russians have a 10-to-1 superiority in artillery, and when they start employing cluster munitions against Ukrainians who are attempting to attack, that means they're not in trenches, they're in the open, they're going to be slaughtered. An even higher degree of death and destruction. So, Joe Biden is just, I mean, it's a fantasy world that he lives in, that somehow, Russia cannot win this war. And then Joe Biden turns around to Finland. I mean, Finland and Sweden are going to regret the day they joined NATO, and I'll tell you why. Because Joe Biden is a failed and failing politician. And there is a better than even chance that he will not be reelected in 2024. And if a Republican candidate is reelected, or if RFK Jr. wins the Democratic nomination and wins the White House, NATO is not going to be given this rock solid guarantee. It's over for NATO because NATO is a disgraced organization. Disgraced, absolutely disgraced. It stands for nothing except wasting taxpayers' money in futile militaristic exercises. NATO will lose in Ukraine just like it lost in Afghanistan, just like it'll lose anywhere else. NATO doesn't have the will to fight without American backing, and it's more than likely the next American president won't give NATO American backing. So this rock-solid guarantee that Joe Biden talks about is over. A Finnish reporter brought it up, and Biden was dismissive. America will never leave NATO. We'll never. America will leave NATO. And as soon as we get another American president in there whose name isn't Joe Biden, America will begin the process of leaving NATO, because NATO stands for nothing but wasted taxpayer dollars and the death and destruction of a nation we claim to be allies with. At some point in time, the United States is going to have to wake up and, reconcile itself to the fact that we killed Ukraine. We destroyed Ukraine. Had we not intervened, Ukraine would be alive and well and living today. But we intervened because we wanted to destroy Russia, using Ukraine as a vehicle to achieve that objective, and we have failed. And NATO has failed. And most Americans will say, then we don't want to be a part of this proposition anymore. So there's a good chance in 4 years, both Finland and Sweden are going to be saying, why did we join this organization? America's falling apart at the seams. Lost the will to fight. Now we're stuck. Now we've irritated the Russians. The Russians aren't falling apart. They just deployed 70,000 more troops near Helsinki. They're building up capabilities to take down Sweden. And both Sweden and Finland are going to be saying, we have to spend billions of euros now to create defenses against a threat that didn't exist until we were stupid enough to join NATO. And maybe they'll do the right thing and leave NATO.
It seems that the Ukrainian Minister of Defense doesn't agree with you on these cluster bombs, cluster munition. He said it's a game changer. And on the other part, Shoigu said that if Ukraine gonna use these cluster bombs, we're gonna use them as well. And Trump called it's gonna be World War III. What sort of impact do these bombs had on the battlefield that makes everybody talking about these, keep talking about these bombs?
Look,
you are an expert. You know how does it work. That's why I'm asking you.
It's not a game-changing technology. This is where the Ukrainian defense minister is wrong. DPICM, dual-purposed improved conventional munitions, sub-munitions, cluster munitions, have what we call assault breaking capability. That is, if the enemy has amassed armor and has dismounted infantry coming at you in mass, they might move too fast for conventional artillery to hit them accurately. So you won't break up the assault. The assault will actually reach the defensive positions, and there's a danger of overrunning your position and penetrating the defenses. So what you want to do in that case is have a munition like a cluster munition that expands the lethal impact with bomblets that will kill or wound or cause to go to ground dismounted infantry and disable or destroy vehicles. And so you can fire these cluster munitions, blanket a wide area. If it's open terrain like the desert or farmer field, you can blunt the attack. That's the goal. But it's not a magic weapon. Remember, it has to be shot by artillery fire. And if the Russians are smart, and I believe they are smart, they have counter battery units ready to lock in on who shot the round, fire their own rounds at them. And now the rounds they fire are going to be cluster munitions, because they're going to use the same strategy against the Ukrainians. And so they're going to fire cluster munitions. Now, the Ukrainians have for every one artillery piece the Ukrainians have, the Russians have 10. So let's say the Ukrainians fire a cluster munition at Russian artillery, and they kill 2, because cluster munitions are deadly. The Russians now fire 8 at the Ukrainians, and they kill the 1. Who wins this battle? The Russians, every single time. But it's that's a gross oversimplification. The Russians they dominate the airspace. Right now, the Ukrainians are losing their vehicles, their artillery pieces, their logistic supplies to drones, loiter drones, kamikaze drones flown by the Russians. The Lancet and other more advanced systems are blanketing the area. They're like a swarm of hornets behind Ukrainian lines, killing everything. They've already gotten to the point where they've run out of artillery and tanks to kill, and now they're using these $25,000 weapons against small groupings of infantry. When in the past you wouldn't use a loiter drone against infantry because it didn't make any sense. That's the only target available because they've killed everything else. So with all due respect to the Ukrainian defense minister, he's smoking dope. I mean, he literally doesn't know what he's talking about. This weapon is not a game changer. The battalion commander of the Russian army that was hit by cluster munitions yesterday said not a single person was killed. How can you have a game-changing technology that doesn't kill anybody? Meanwhile, the Russians are still in the business of slaughtering the Ukrainians, slaughtering them. It's sickening at the extermination rate that's taking place on the front lines right now. So, yeah, again, we have to remember the Ukrainians are in the business of reading scripts prepared for them by NATO that create the perception of the inevitability of a Ukrainian victory. The Russians don't care about the script, they care about reality, and the reality is the Russians are slaughtering the Ukrainians at a rate of 10 to 1. The Ukrainians are going to run out of resources. Jan Stoltenberg back in last fall said that Ukraine will run out of artillery shells this summer. It's officially summer, and they're running out of artillery shells, and there's nothing the West can do to change that outcome except provide Ukraine with a handful of cluster artillery shells. But these cluster artillery shells aren't game changers. They're going to run out of them soon, and then what's going to happen? Like I said, Russia has won this war. It's just a matter of time before the Ukrainian military collapses.
Did you see this video that came out in Irish mercenaries talking about the situation on the battlefield? He's telling that
I did.
It's so tragic. It's so tragic.
What is it like right now on the front line, the 0 point?
Zero line, it's horror. It's horror. There is just, it's a genocide. It's slaughter. There is just people dead everywhere. Russians dead, Ukrainian people dead, Ukrainian soldiers dead, just left there. Just left there. And I don't know why.
He was...
Not really. First of all, let's just be clear. He's a mercenary. Do not have any sympathy for him. It's not his war. He's a foreigner who went to Ukraine to kill Russians. So I have no sympathy for this man, none whatsoever. Now, if he was a Ukrainian soldier fighting, for the cause of Ukraine, which, I believe that it's been perverted by the Zielinski government, I would have sympathy for this man. I would say that this is a human being torn asunder by war, the psychological impact. But this is a mercenary. So let's stop pretending that we should care for him. He's a man who took money to kill Russians in a conflict that's not his own. He deserves everything he got. He's lucky to be alive.
Russia said that, Dmitry Peskov said that security guarantees to Ukraine are so dangerous, extremely dangerous. Why he evaluated these security guarantees as extremely dangerous act?
Well, first of all, if you have a security guarantee, what happens when that which triggers the guarantee occurs? You have to guarantee the security. Ukraine is a dead nation. It's going to die. It's made that decision itself, and Russia is going to kill it. What we currently call Ukraine will not exist when this war is over. So the question now is, if you've guaranteed Ukraine's security and Ukraine's in the process of being killed, at what point in time do you implement your guarantee? Which means a direct conflict with Russia. And Russia's not playing around. This isn't a game. This is real for Russia. Joe Biden again made a statement, Russia will never use nuclear weapons. Never, never, never. Don't push it, Joe. Don't push it. Because Russia will use nuclear weapons. If the conditions are created that require Russia to use nuclear weapons, they will use them without hesitation. And security guarantees provided by G7 nations or NATO have the potential of creating the conditions that could prompt Russia to use nuclear weapons. That's why Peskov said this is very dangerous.
In Biden's meeting with Zielinski, he said that the bad news for Ukraine is we're not going anywhere. And we're not going away. We're not leaving Ukraine alone. we're going to continue supporting Ukraine. Do you think that he's going to keep supporting Ukraine because of his election, because his race in U.S. election?
I think we're going to see Biden continuing to make a very strong public face. Words, words, words. But behind the scenes, he'll be desperately looking for conflict termination. Remember, Joe Biden is a man that former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, also a CIA acting director, said that he's been wrong on every major national security issue his entire life. He's never been right on anything. And Biden is wrong on Ukraine. He's just 100% wrong on Ukraine. Ukraine will not, the continued support of Ukraine will not be a platform item that strengthens the Democratic ticket. You're going to be seeing the Democrats saying we need to disengage from this war. We can't be discussing this war in the lead up to the 2024 election. It's bad for us. And so, again, everything Biden said has to be, cast in that light, that he himself is apparently having behind the scenes discussions about how to get out of this war. The other thing that we need to understand is that there's a very good chance Biden will not be reelected. He's not a popular president. Both Donald Trump and RFK Jr. Have a real potential of beating Joe Biden in a general election. And so his words that to Zielinski that, we're here, we're not going anywhere, it's absurd. Joe Biden will more than likely be unemployed come January of 2025. And there'll be a new president who won't be inclined to support Zielinski or NATO to the degree that Joe Biden has. So I think we need to be very careful when we heavily emphasize Biden's words, because he's been wrong on everything, every time, and his words are often backed by nothing more than hot air. There's no substance, and we see that unfolding in Ukraine today. We're not giving them what they need. We're not providing the weaponry they want. And we don't, even if we wanted to, we don't have the capacity to do that anymore, especially in field artillery. We've stripped our strategic stockpiles to the bone, and we need to rebuild these strategic stockpiles because if there was a conflict with Russia, we would be guaranteed to lose if we don't have any artillery ammunition. And right now we're running out of it. The same thing if we had to go to war against China. We need ammunition that we don't have. So, Biden is in typical fashion allowing his mouth to get the better of himself. To quote a line from Top Gun, the original Top Gun movie, his mouth is writing checks his body can't cash. He needs to start to shut up, speak less. But every time he opens his mouth now, it's just a further embarrassment and a further indication of just how weak we are and how wrong he is.
You think when that important moment comes, like in Iraq, in Afghanistan, the U.S. gonna just simply leave Ukraine alone?
100%. I said it about Iraq. How many mothers in Poughkeepsie are willing to sacrifice their son in Iraq? And the answer is none. And I'll ask the same question. How many mothers in Poughkeepsie are willing to sacrifice their son in Ukraine? And the answer is none. Nobody wants to die in Ukraine. Not even the mercenaries. They're running away. The Biden's words have no meaning.
We know how it did end up in Iraq, in Afghanistan. Let's say it happens the same for Ukraine. What happens inside Ukraine? Do you see the game of power inside Ukraine? How would it look like?
Well, I think the Russians have made it clear that their goal is denazification, and they've linked the Zielinski government with Nazi ideology. Therefore, the Zielinski government will be eliminated. They'll either be arrested, be killed, or driven out of power, flee the country. So there'll be a new government. That government will be selected by Russia. Russia will pick a loyalist government that will implement the policies that Russia wants implemented. I've spoken with people who are on the committee that considers these issues, and this individual indicated that it could take 3, 4, 5 years of martial law to purge Ukraine of the political influences that are destructive to Ukraine, such as Banderist ideology. Either to arrest, kill, or cause to flee the supporters of Stepan Bandera, people from the right sector, Sloboda, the Azov Regiment, anybody that has espoused Nazi ideology or Nazi causes will be purged from Ukraine. A great unknown will be what will happen to Western Ukraine. If Russia's in the business of dismembering and weakening Ukraine, there might be a situation where they allow at least some territories of Western Ukraine to be absorbed by Poland. We'll see. That's hard to know. But what I can say is that based upon the rhetoric that's coming out of Russia, the idea of Ukraine surviving as a viable nation state is approaching ludicrous. If Russia absorbs Odessa and cuts Ukraine off from the sea, that destroys the Ukrainian economy. If Russia occupies Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, and other areas, they continue to occupy the Donbass, they've taken away the strategic industrial capacity of the former Ukrainian state. This means that Ukraine will be left to be nothing more than a agricultural focused rump state. They have infrastructure that they can't afford to rebuild. They're going to need help doing that. But if they continue to resist and they turn their back, for instance, on a Chinese peace plan, the Chinese might not be so willing to help Ukraine bail itself out. I don't know exactly what the future is going to look like, but I strongly believe that it will not look like the present. That Ukraine, as it's currently configured, both politically and geographically, will be far different from that which exists today.
And let's close our talk with RFK Jr. His campaign is getting momentum. How do you see his way in this election? Do you think he's getting better, gonna be a better position to defeat Joe Biden? Or do you see that Democratic Party is gonna get more solid toward him and doesn't let him to be the final nomination of the Democratic Party?
I see RFK Jr. gaining momentum. I see his message gaining traction amongst important segments of the American population. I see him getting stronger and stronger and stronger as a candidate. We need to remember that we're in July of 2023, and perceptions that exist today are meaningless come November 2024, that a lot can happen between now and then. But I think that RFK Jr. should be proud of where he's at right now, proud of the campaign that he's running, proud of the momentum he's gathering. There's a significant portion of American society that feels disenfranchised, and they're very concerned about the inability of existing political parties to represent their views. They feel deceived by the COVID-19 overreaction by the U.S. government. They feel lied to by the U.S. government about the wars in the Middle East and the wars in Ukraine. They feel frustrated by policies that are being forced down their throats on sensitive social issues. I think you're seeing the development of an electorate that is not anchored in either Republican or Democratic ideology, and as such available for somebody who operates outside of those areas. And even though Donald Trump is a Republican, the fact of the matter is the Republican establishment will never will never throw their weight behind him officially. I mean, they'll do it, but they don't want to do it. But Trump wins because he has a base that is completely loyal to him, for better or for worse. RFK Jr. doesn't quite have that base, but he is running in support of, or engendering support among certain segments of the population that feel betrayed by the COVID overreaction of the government. They feel that everything about COVID has been a lie, that the vaccines were forced upon them. This is a serious issue that the mainstream politicians aren't addressing because we haven't been allowed to discuss it here in the United States. So we now found out that the Biden administration has been seeking to use the Department of Justice and Homeland Security to silence voices of dissent. Thankfully, we live in a republic where we have checks and balances to power, and the courts have checked Biden's overreach and said that that you can't interfere with the free speech of these people. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is giving voice to many of these concerns that are out there. And I just think that for the mainstream to be dismissive of him is their own downfall. They should take him seriously because he's a serious candidate. He has serious support. And if you're not ready for that, he could seriously win.
He literally is building everything from scratch. When he started, I didn't know about him. He built everything from scratch. It's like a foundation. He's building the foundation, then the buildings come on.
Well, you can't rely on the Democratic National Committee. They've already said that they're behind Biden all the way. And so if you can't rely on existing support networks, you build your own. And I think we're seeing that RFK Jr. Is far more politically savvy than people give him credit for.
Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today.
Thanks for
Always a
having me.
pleasure.
Okay, thanks.